Today I'm going to talk about some of the work I've been done, like in the space of for online learning and optimization, particularly for demand response in energy system. So yeah, let's look at some news before we jump into sort of definition or formulation, that kind of thing. So let's just look at some of the recent news, and some are not that recent, but let's see. First one, you see that actually Australia opened a demand response market in addition to the market we have currently. For example, the spot energy market, and also the FCAS market, basically is to for the power system to do the frequency control. So yeah, so actually it's definitely sort of hot topic, and in other countries, like in the US, also in Australia, in European countries, there are also like a demand response market or mechanisms already implemented there. And if we look at the second, let's say, news, that actually from financial review, that's saying demand response could be a win-win sort of solution for Australian business and certainly the Australian energy system. So here, I think it talks about like a business, right? They consume energy, and they can participate in the demand response and to get some benefit from the performing demand response, right? So that's sort of the win-win situation. And the other side of the power grid can somehow save or reduce their, let's say, peak loads and the stress, right, on their system operation. So that's certainly a good thing and a win-win for both sides. There's other news. The third one actually talk about more like residential users, and they say household can cut electricity bill, right, with demand response options. Basically, it's doing something similar, like a household reduce energy consumption and get reward from the retailer or aggregator depending on the mechanism of it. So here it looks like not only the big industrial loads, but also commercial business and residential loads can participate in that and gain some benefits. And the fourth one is actually the most recent one that's showing in South Australia, the government actually mandated some of the sort of on the air conditioners that to be able to perform demand response. And such practice, or especially, let's say, using thermostats, has been actually widely used in the US to perform demand response. So these are the sort of the news around demand response, and showing that basically it's quite kind of useful, right, tool, right, for the system. And okay, so yeah, so before, let's say, talking like demand response, how we do it, for example, or the challenges with it, so we can step back and look at the bigger, even bigger picture that actually also somehow justify, right, the need of demand response in the overall picture to, let's say, achieve net zero certainly by 2050, and certainly a lot of concrete steps we need to take in the middle. So just a bit on the background of what we are, the journey, right, to net zero, that because of the global warming that we committed. That here's a map, shows a lot of countries in green, that basically shows certain levels of legislation ready there to committed to net zero. So most of the countries, and certainly like a sort of will agree to mostly to the net zero journey to kind of reduce or cut the greenhouse gas emission, right, and a different agenda and different pace. And certainly that's a sort of big challenge, because we see a really big change that everywhere, right, particularly in the energy system. And the energy system net zero transition actually is at the heart of it, right? So we all consume energy, and the way we generate electricity in the old way using fossil fuels certainly is not sustainable, and that is one of the major areas we need to work on and to reduce the carbon emission. So by introducing or by integrating a lot of, let's say, sustainable and renewable energy into the system, and also by incorporating some of the flexibility, let's say, from the energy storage. And also, we're going to talk about the demand response as part of the equation to enable flexibility from the demand side. And a lot of things happening, not only just to electricity generation, but also like to buildings, to transport, agriculture, all these different sectors that a lot of them have been committed to net zero the efforts, right? To, for example, in transport, we have the transport electrification, and we have a lot of EVs, and some other people may talk about alternative fuel like hydrogen, and all part of the journey to net zero. And because my research mainly focused on the energy system, and I'm going to, let's say, focus here on the sort of the future for Australia. That here's like a report from the government report on like the projection, like the ISP part of that to see what we need actually to achieve net zero for the electric system. That we need a lot of different kinds of various kinds of renewables. For example, you can see from the right hand figure that, let's say, by 2050, you see a big portion of those distributed PV, that we see a lot of those already, right? And also we need a lot of other utility scale solar and wind, and we also talk about like offshore wind. And in addition to that, we need some of the sort of balancing ability or the flexibility in the system to balance the supply demand. Later on, I'm going to talk about that. For example, we need to have, for example, various kinds of energy storage to make sure that we can balance those supply and demand, because all those renewables are not dispatchable, and but we always need to meet the demand, and demand certainly would have some different kind of time varying patterns, right? So that's always a really big challenge. And so a lot of time we sort of characterize those different resources, let's say, to two types. One is the grid scale, the other is like the behind the meter or the realization side. But we see a lot of growing in both like parts of the energy system. And this is certainly a big change. It really like a new landscape for the energy system, because we all rely on and the fossil fuel dispatchable generation, right, from the to generate power. But later we're going to retire all those kind of coal, right, and in a lot of countries agenda, and to really integrate more renewable energy into the system. That caused a lot of actually trouble, right, somehow to the system operation. So the future system can change from you can see the top figure, right, to the bottom one. The key difference, as you can see, right, we have a lot of like large scale renewables into the system, and also a lot of different kinds of, on the right, on the bottom right, you can see a lot of distributed energy resources, including like some of the battery, right, and local storage, and solar, and maybe some of the distributed wind as well. So we can get energy, right, from the energy user side, from the places really close to us, and also pretty much also kind of rely on the traditional transmission grids to get the power from the large scale and the grid scale generation, mostly from renewable. So that is the sort of certainly a big change, right? If we zoom in a little bit, let's say from the left-hand side figure that you can see, right, to power, for example, the users, right, on the left side, the power came from the transmission, through the transmission line. We have a lot of different large-scale power generators. Let's say in this case, we have a lot of wind farm and solar farms. And then also somewhere close to community, we have some small-scale solar farm, and we even can have that solar panel on the rooftop, right? So that is the sort of different parts of, or the level of the system, the generation we have in the system, and we see a really high increasing uptake, especially, let's say, we have a lot of this rooftop solar. But as you can see, right, we pretty much rely on renewable energy in the future, but it's really hard to say balance, right, the renewable supply and and the demand, we haven't really changed much, right? From, let's say, the consumption behavior, and we pretty much consume energy probably the same way. And but we have big change in the supply side. So if you look at the right-hand figure, we have the California, so this, or the whole like a state system load, which is pretty big, and you can see the demand is the green curve, and that's pretty much the same, right? Like if compared to let's say 2019 and 2023, there's 2 days. And but the significant change, right? We have a lot of, well, they have a lot of solar generation, right? From pretty much both grid scale and also the rooftop solar. Then the net load, right, dropped a lot in the daytime. That's certainly a big challenge, and also we can see a big mismatch, right, between the supply and demand. And the wind pretty much generates the power like pretty much all day, because that's not really like a sunlight dependent, right? So, and also you aggregate a lot of wind farm together. In this case, you have a pretty flat kind of curve, and certainly this doesn't reflect the curtailment made to the renewable generation. A lot of times they do that, and it's pretty like a remarkable amount actually generation being wasted. South Australia has some similar situation, or even like more kind of serious than California, because this figure also shows, probably just look at the scheduled load, right? The green load, the curve, but you can see that in the daytime is pretty low, and almost like meets some of the preset minimum operating demand. But in the evening, right, you can see that there's a peak, and you always to meet that demand for the system. So that's the sort of the new situation, and that's also caused by the mismatch between the supply and demand. Okay, so we're not going to talk about like a more like a power technical challenge here, but let's just look at the energy supply and demand balance. That's already a big challenge. So we need to, well, for the energy system, right, we need to have this supply and demand balance for all time, and especially this challenge is, well, we see that especially when we're committed to net zero transition, we don't have dispatchable generation. We all rely on renewable and with some battery. So the solution here, right, to help balance the supply and demand is to add some flexibility in the system to shift, for example, the generation from time that we don't use them and to the time we do need them. So that's the one of the sort of could be kind of straightforward idea. And the solution included technology-wise, we have energy storage can do that for us. The energy storage can store energy and absorb some of the excessive generation from the solar wind farm that we can't use for now, and we can store there and use it later. And the demand response coming in here, another sort of promising solution, that is you can change your demand pattern, right, to use more when you have that supply, but use less when there's not enough generation from the clean resources, or there's a really stress moment, some hours there's peak load and we want to reduce the demand. So these are the kind of two solutions in the equation. And we have a lot of those, well, battery is not the top, kind of focus today, but we need to acknowledge that this is also one of the big solution that we have. Big batteries, there's Mac packs, right, different places, and also one in Geelong, in across Australia, many of those projects. And also we have to close down to the user side, we have those like hundreds of kilowatt hour capacity batteries. For example, here's one like in the Fishery North as a community battery. We have all those, and certainly also have their behind the meter battery. So battery certainly is as part of this key solution, but probably can talk about that in some future talks, but we're going to focus on, let's say, demand response. So certainly we look at the whole like solutions, right, in more like a holistic manner, that as the problems actually is to balance the supply demand. We can't change a lot of the supply, or plus the battery, we can't do it completely. We refer to the other side of demand side and to perform demand response. So here the figure shows the general idea of demand response, right? So you can see the sort of the blue curve here basically shows the original demand that pretty much, let's say, could be like a household, right? Home consumption that you probably have two peaks, one at the morning, the other in the evening, and especially the evening part is pretty big. And you have your solar in the daytime. But certainly a lot of times if you go to work and you're not at home, you're not consume that much. So that part is sort of wasted or fit into the grid, and that certainly causes other kind of trouble we're going to not talk about today. But if you have that capability of doing like demand shift or demand response, right, then you can try to shift some of the shiftable load, right, from the you used to use those right in the evening time, but to the daytime, and that can absorb a lot of solar energy. We have those kind of flexibility at home actually, and also for business or for industry consumers. They all have different levels of that flexibility that can actually contribute to the demand response, right? So we have, for example, at home, we have washing machine, we have the water heater, for example, or like AC or thermostats, right? Can all be flexible and optimized a certain way to take advantage of the free and clean generation from the renewable, particularly solar, and to offset some of or shave the peak in the evening. That's pretty much the idea. And this is like more like a daily business for the consumers, right? They can do, and certainly at some other kind of emergency or contingency kind of cases when there's a need from the system can talk to the consumer, say that yeah, you can turn off something that to reduce the demand, and that will be safe and reliable, right? At least for that period of time, and everyone get into that will be get some rewards as incentive. So that's how it works. So just jump to the demand response. Hopefully, from the previous slides that I'll convince you that supply and demand, right, is a challenging task and certainly a critical one in for energy system. And we have the solution like batteries, and the other side is the demand side. We can do a lot of work to incentivize demand shift or load reduction. So here is what we focus on, the demand response programs. So certainly there are a lot of different kinds of those programs, and you also probably see, well, even from news or different like research papers that people talk about different settings, right? And for example, if you look at this diagram here on the left-hand side, you have the incentive-based demand response, and the classical one is so-called the direct load control. Basically, we have it here, right? We have for example, the water heater control, and somehow the utility gonna turn on around, let's say 11 p.m. something at night when there's the off-peak hours, and to heat up other like cooling or heating that as part of thermostat control that have been implemented in the US. So that's one of the really typical and classical demand response. That's sort of the utility can have direct control. But certainly nowadays people would like to have some control with their own energy consumption, and there are two kinds of those kind of programs. Is one that is still incentive based, but it's pretty much on, let's say, a market. So it's like interested participants can register with, let's say, the utility or the operator, say that I'm willing to provide the demand response service. Certainly that means you're going to reduce the load when you are needed to do so. And the operator, it depends on how much reduction is needed, and talk to the customer, say that, hey, here's like a event or urgency, and how about reduce the load by somehow, and just depending on how much you want to reduce. And certainly your efforts as customer, right, to reduce load will get compensated by some of the rewards. That's how it works. And certainly depending on how often that can happen, then we have different markets for that. And very different countries have different kinds of market. But in general, it works in that certain way. And the other type of demand response is so-called price-based, right? So we all consumers are like we buy all kind of commodity, and the energy is just part of it. So if you change the price of the electricity for a certain time, that we already see, right? So-called time of use, another type of pricing signal, and you'll be able to schedule your energy usage to avoid those high price periods and try to use take advantage of those low price periods. So that's the sort of idea. And in addition to this, this kind of preset pricing or tariff, the utility or the operator or aggregator, depending on the setting, right, or the mechanism, can also talk to the customer, say that, okay, here's the reward or the price I'm going to pay you, and how much you want to reduce. That depends on your own choices. And then the utility or the operator or aggregator will see a certain amount of reduction. So that's the other, also is a price as a kind of incentive there. So there are these kinds of mechanism working for the demand response programs. So, and also according to some kind of literature, for example, here's from the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, that talking about both kinds of price and incentive mechanism could be used, right, in the energy system planning and operation in different time scales. So I'm going to skip this part, but it's just to give you like a sense, saying that demand response can be quite useful to the power system planning and operation. So here later on, I'm going to talk about two works collaborated with a few researchers in the US from the Penn and Belson from the University of Washington, and Mark and Ron from Stanford University. So first, we'll talk about this so-called price-based demand response. So as you can see in the left-hand side figure, right, we have a grid operator and a service provider. Service provider basically is the aggregator, right? Try to aggregate the low reduction from bound customers. And certainly the grid operator set certain, let's say, goal, right? Or the other way around is like the service provider can try to kind of commit, right? Say that how much the service provider can get from the users to feed that into the sort of wholesale demand response market. So there are various kinds of level of those demand response, right? From the really end user side and through aggregation and to participate in the wholesale markets, because user or the consumer somehow, the customer is too small sometimes to be actually be part of the wholesale market. So that all makes sense here. So customer or the consumer are going to interact with the service provider or the aggregator. The aggregator will certainly pay, right? The customer say that per kilowatt hour reduction, right? How much this aggregator at this time, if there's an event, going to pay to the customers or consumers. And the consumer are going to respond to that by reducing its load. And the right-hand figure shows that, right? So this kind of situation may not happen all the time because we have all kinds of other type of pricing, for example, time use as a signal in the contract with the user. The user know precisely when, how much right to be charged. So here is more like a event happen. There's a system peak that maybe the operator cannot handle or really costly to meet that demand, and then talk to the service provider, say that everyone can bid, and aggregator or the service provider talk to customers, say that I'm going to pay you how much, right? And then to get your demand response in terms of load reduction, and eventually the system can observe, right, a demand reduction. So that's the kind of price-based demand response here going to work. But certainly this will be quite challenging because, let's say, now the say service provider or the aggregator knows, right, their customers ahead, or have an accurate model for the consumers, right, to model how much they're going to reduce. Certainly that's a really challenging task. Like any other merchants, they have pretty much not, well, unless you have collected a lot of data about the customers and try to build a model, but in general, you don't have that. You don't know your customers that well. This is certainly one of the challenges. And the other challenge is like it's like I can decide, for example, the service provider or the aggregator say this is a price or as a reward I can provide to the users. But to different customers, people may respond differently. And to some people, you would say that even $10 per kilowatt hour reduction, they may not respond to that at all. And some customers say that they want to save and save some money, right? Even at, let's say, rate of $4.5, right? So that could be all the case, right? Quite diverse across all the customers, and those behavior, right, of saving energy or respond to the price would be very, very different. So that's the other sort of challenge we are dealing with. A lot of like real people, and that's really hard to have a kind of know their behavior in advance, right? And the other challenge actually is also quite practical, is say, even the customer receive the signal at this time or that time, saying that this is the money you can get, $10 or $5 or $0.5, and then how this customer or the consumer are going to respond to that price. A lot of times customers are unconscious about that, their own behavior as well. Say when there's a signal and say how many of the lights gonna turn off, you would decide to do that, or how much reduction you can get. So all of these things are somehow too complex even for individual customer to make a decision or know precisely about themselves. So that unconsciousness here also makes the problem quite challenging to solve. So then we are sort of motivated to look at this really realistic setting, right? By looking at, because we don't have the prior information about customers and do like a big data analysis, we have to do it more like interactively and work with customers in a sort of online fashion and interact with customers by providing some price and see how they're going to respond and try to learn that from it. So here we're going to try to refer to so-called this online pricing, and through it we try to learn the customers or the consumers' behavior. And certainly we don't need to know any of the prior information about the customers or try to build a model in advance. So we don't have that. And also, right, when you implement any of those kind of demand response programs, you can't, right, pretty rely on extensive communication with your customers. Let's say you can't, let's say, do like a kind of bargaining or kind of thing with customers, say that, oh, this is how much you're going to pay, and customers say, no, this is not what I want, and raise the price or something, and through negotiation, or then later on you need to sort out how much reduction you can get. So that multiple round of iteration, right, from the aggregator with, let's say, tens of thousands of customers, really challenging. So we don't rely on that. Let's say we just have one iteration, just as simple as, right, the aggregator or the service provider provide one signal to the user, and that's done. That's all you can do for the aggregator side, and then let the consumer respond to that signal, and that's as one iteration. This is done for this time or for this event, and next time you try to learn something from the realization, right, of the users or the customers' response, and with your pricing, and to learn what will be a good pricing next time. And certainly on another task with time varying reduction target. So that's the sort of the realistic setting we want to have. And here we provide like a framework to enable this kind of online demand response. We learn and do the pricing, right, at the same time, and we with analysis later show that we can not the sort of optimal regret, but just like achieve a reasonable regret compared to the scenario, the really optimal, that you know pretty much everything about the user's equity model and the optimal pricing you can make. So also certainly the online type of interaction is a lot easier to implement. So let's look at this problem setting. So here, right, let's say we don't have the data of the users. We're just about to learn them from the online iteration, the interaction. So the problem setups, like we have the operator or the aggregator, regardless of name or utility company, want to, right, manage, right, demand response program by sending reward lambda t at time t when there's event. to reduce demand. And certainly the demand reduction will come from all the users I, right, and a group of users, and each user going to reduce, let's say we denote as XIT at this time T. And certainly we don't have historical information, we don't have that iterative communication, just a one-shot pricing signal response and dump and to the next round. So the operator here or the aggregator cares about certainly to meet the
question, is that automated response or human mediated response at the customer end?
Here is more like a kind of the human, we try to learn the human behavior.
All right, sorry.
Yeah. So the operator's model, right, is to from the revenue, right, you can get is like if it can sort of deliver the demand response, right, to the wholesale market, right, by committed to certain capacity, and it will earn a reward from the upstream market. And the cost to do so is the aggregator or the operator to pay the individual customers, because each customer all those right aggregate to the overall reduction that this aggregator can commit. So the variable here the operator going to decide, right, as in this cost is actually the so-called this well, the cost here is actually, let's say, try to, let's say, meet exactly the committed amount. So any deviation from that will be sort of penalized in a certain way, but which means this operator tried to achieve this accurate or the committed kind of low reduction. And similar to all the other like generators, for example, in the market try to bid, and if you can't deliver the bid you committed to generate, and then you would get penalized. So this is the cost about the deviation. So the goal is clear, right? The operator certainly try to provide the right signal to the user to sort of induce that right amount of for low reduction, otherwise it'd be penalized. So the consumer side here is a sort of assumption we have for the users. We have the utility function for the consumer that how they like that sort of evaluate, right, the low reduction. This is certainly a cost to them, because if you reduce more and you may cause certain inconvenience or discomfort to the household, for example. So we assume that utility or somehow as a cost function actually to the customers as a quadratic form. So we have those two parameters, beta I and alpha I, as the unknown parameter of the users. And that's exactly part we try to learn. And also this actually is also, let's say the users are not that conscious about those two parameters. And that's somehow something we need to know, to learn from those online interactions. And for the consumer, right, so they will suffer from something as measured by this cost, but certainly we get rewarded, compensated by that lambda as a unit reward provided by the operator to the customer per, let's say, dollar per kilowatt hour load reduction. So here the challenge you can see is that we don't have this precise model. Well, we have the structure of it, but we don't know the parameters in it, right? Then the problem formulation will be in each round when there's a need to do demand response, and the operator will provide a price signal lambda t to the user, and the user will see that unified prices and respond to that. And as we explained before that, the users actually are somehow unconscious about what they're going to do, but they just respond to that signal. And the operator try to minimize the overall like expected cost of the system, pretty much everything. So skip this part. But as you can see, this kind of problem is certainly hard to solve or not possible, right? In the using the offline optimization, because we don't know the parameters. Though it's pretty much like a simple, like a convex optimization problem. So we seek the online solution, right? Try to estimate the unknown parameters and try to then optimize the price based on the sort of the estimation of these parameters and so on and so forth, and try to hopefully, right, achieve or to estimate those two parameters accurately, and then to provide the real optimal price. So that's the key idea behind that. So how it works is like at each time when there's a need to do demand response, and the operator will decide to reward and provide to the users. And certainly the operator don't know the future and won't, as in this case, estimate anything for the future, but just observe what they have from all the previous rounds of the rewards, pair of rewards, and the users response. So just the historical information. And as we know that we don't have, well, when before doing this, there's no prior information. It's just to basically try something at first and then go so on and so forth and try to collect a set like some information about through the users and operator interaction. So this is the how it works, right? And we can, based on like the way, right, this online strategy works, that we develop this online algorithm to estimate the aggregate user response. And certainly here that because the aggregator only cares about in this task, right, to deliver the right total amount of the aggregate amount load reduction, not from each individual people. Otherwise, the learning will be quite overwhelming to look at each individual people. But here we only look at aggregate response, just adding all the users kind of parameter all together. So actually we can add them up, and we only have two, right, unknown parameters that we need to estimate. Certainly this two parameter we may change over time because we have like a different customer coming or leave. But let's say, right, in this case, if it doesn't change that dramatically, then you'll be able to actually, you'll get a chance actually to estimate this gamma 1 and 2 as the unknown parameter of the aggregate response of the users. And based on based on the user's response, we know the how much load reduction we would observe, and also we know precisely the price we're going to send. And based on this, we can build like a regression model to estimate these two parameters. And more of those observations, the higher accuracy we could achieve actually to estimate these two parameters. Those are the other key ideas. And using these two parameters, and the operator going to take into its own equation and determine that optimal pricing. So that is how it works. So to evaluate how well this online algorithm works, we introduce this regrets measure, right, to compare the expected cost from the using this in the realistic setting using the online algorithm compared to the case that we know precisely about users parameters that are unknown and are even unconscious, right? And suppose we know that, right? And then we can pretty much quite easily solve that optimal pricing each time to meet the total demand reduction. So we compare our online algorithm performance in terms of cost, right? Expected cost compared to the optimal case. Certainly that's not really realistic, but we want to see how well we can perform, right? And the analysis showed that we can actually achieve in the end the log-t regret, which is really certainly is a sublinear regret, and over time divided by the time on the average, we see actually that decays to 0. Basically, it's really good online strategy we can develop. And log-t is also better than other spiral root t and other kind of regret. So here is the numerical simulation. The left side figure shows that this is the instant gap between the algorithm, right, in terms of cost compared to the optimal. So, and the decay is really fast, and accumulate all those instant gap or the sort of performance gap, and you can see on the right hand side we have the cumulative regret as a log-t sort of function, and that certainly verify the log-t performance for this algorithm. And we can also look at these rewards and the low reduction. So here the red dash line represents the optimal price we can send and also the optimal aggregate response we can, or the low reduction we can get. And the blue dash curves represent the outline, the Hao Wang's pricing and the realized low reduction. So you can see these two curves certainly have some mismatch at the beginning. That certainly is the sort of the learning phase for this algorithm, but you can see actually after several iterations, after you, let's say up to 70 or somehow, you can see that these two curves overlap with each other quite well, and which basically shows that this algorithm can somehow learn these unknown parameters quite well and determine the really close to optimal price. So that's the whole work related to the price-based demand response. And later on, I have a bit of time to talk about the other incentive-based demand response. To recall that here, I use a figure, for example, from the South Korean model, right, used for this sort of incentive-based demand response. Basically, it's like on the right-hand side, we have this KPX, that's the Korea Power Exchange, basically the operator, and in the middle is the service provider or the DR aggregator, try to actually get the demand response from the user and then to feed into the market or through whatever mechanism and to kind of deliver that service or demand response service to the overall system. So here, the way it works, if you look at the right-hand side, we have different kinds of customers, right? Consumers, we have the residential, commercial, or different buildings, for example, apartment, and the industry or education, like different kinds of customers. If they enroll right in this demand response program or like or registered right with this aggregator, basically it means that they are committed to provide that service in terms of low reduction when there's a need or when they are called upon. So that is how it works, and they may enter into like a contract or agreement now to get paid by something, but different from the price-based mechanism is that they are more like a passive here, not proactive to determine how much they want to reduce based on the price. But here is like you're being called to provide reduction, and you just reduce whatever you can, and you're going to compensate it by either how much or each time how much you're being reported, different mechanism or different formulas to calculate and how to compensate. Provide that to the end customer or the consumers. So that's the way how it works. But certainly, apparently, that we may wonder that different. So here, let's say mix different types of customers with each other, like residential industry. We just look at let's say all the residential users, and that's also one part of the kind of demand response program, and the user can try to reduce, as I showed before, that there are some flexibility sort of for resource or consumer any resource, right, with each residential consumer, that they can try to leverage that and to provide flexibility and to reduce energy. So let's, for example, look at the residential users. And the key question here is that we have a lot of times, I would say, the aggregator may not need everyone to, let's say, provide the best sort of effort reduction. And a lot of times when there's some emergency or whatever event, that there's a kind of expected reduction, and not all the users may be called to perform demand response or to actually get compensated. So in that case, actually, this heavily involves for this kind of incentive-based demand response to actually to select customers to perform. And those unselected ones don't need to participate in this round. But what would happen could be some of the users would be caught all the time and some users never be caught. Maybe it's just like as a reviewer, you provide all these high quality reviews and be caught upon more frequently to provide that again in the future. But that somehow is a bias, and the system would easily lead to that kind of bias results. And always to call upon this user can provide something, but you sort of mix the other group of users. And also, if we look into the users, if you know, right, by this could be done that by different zip code or different regions that those different customers, especially residential customers, are from, let's say, quite different diverse socioeconomic backgrounds. And some of the research in the US did, like in the Southern California, they have some pilot projects using demand response and try to observe different groups of people have different kind of willingness to provide demand response, and also they may be affected by demand response or the load reduction differently. So we are dealing with, let's say in the case, a very diverse group of people, or especially when we talk about residential customers. So we want to design such demand response program, in particular incentive-based demand response, to select the customers or consumers sort of in a fair manner that everyone would be treated somehow in the equal manner, and then would be called somehow equally, and all across different groups. So that's the key challenge, and that's the sort of gap in the practice, and we care more about this so-called energy fairness or energy disparity issues. So here is the already talked about this fairness issue in the demand response, right? So the aggregator may call upon users to perform demand response, and some people may say that I've been always called that because it just performed maybe too well, but they somehow don't know or have the strategy to hide themselves from that demand response program. So, and also to a lot of users, they're willing to participate in this program means that they actually would like to kind of cooperate in a way and get compensated. But if you don't select them, don't give them any chance, to know how much they can reduce or how much they can contribute to. So that's also somehow that cause unfairness here. So we would like to look at the fairness among the demand response in the demand response, and in particular, certainly the machine learning literature, they are literally look at various kinds of demand, the fairness definition, but here we are more interested in this kind of individual versus group fairness, because we are dealing with a group of people, and the group of people have different kinds of social demographics, or they may be affected by the demand response low reduction differently, or if we look at the individual people, they're all different. So that's the sort of the focus. And okay, so we to set up this problem, we need to provide, for example, here like a really kind of straightforward kind of formulation, for the aggregator, for example. So aggregator here has a sort of target LT, which is time varying to achieve, This is a sort of the aggregate load reduction we need to achieve, and certainly those will be from those different users, and the XT here is the selection as a binary variable 0 and 1 to select each individual user. So here certainly is a sort of vector form, but you expand that includes tens of thousands different entries that each of those correspond to one customer, and we need to decide which one will be selected. And certainly when you select a customer, there are a lot of things you don't know, as I also explained in similar to the price-based demand response. Say how much people would like to reduce, that's something you don't know in advance, and also how much you may need to compensate for that user or for that customer is also unknown. That's the C here, and here the C actually can take different kind of form. It can be, let's say, the reduction D dependent. It can also be something else, but something the operator or the aggregator doesn't know in advance. So these two are the unknown parameters, each for the user, each from the also unknown distribution. But certainly here we assume that is a stationary kind of distribution for the user. So the decision variable is to select each user, yes or no. And we introduce these two fairness metric, as group fairness and individual fairness. So the group fairness basically compare, let's say, two groups, one disadvantaged or underrepresented, the other is sort of like the sort of the ordinary group. And we try to make sure that one group won't be selected more often than the other. So we can skip the the equation here, but the idea is to try to make sure the other group, one of the group, or disadvantaged or underrepresented or won't be bothered too much, or the other way around, to make sure that they will be called to get that financial benefit. So either way, depending on how we want to set up the problem. And individual fairness is the same, that we compare across two groups. And here is like a quite simple form that we compare the sort of frequency of how many times it will be called, and we try to make sure that the two, right, want each individual user in different groups, right? You can have that pairwise comparison, and you will make sure that there's not that big difference. So bounded by some of the preset thresholds. So certainly the previous problem that we plug in this equation can get this kind of general form, right? And the general form we can, just be quick here, we can formulate as like a multi-arm bandit problem, because each of the customer here is like an arm, right? We try to pull it and try to observe those unknown parameters. One is about how much they can reduce. The other is about their underlying like a cost, associated cost. And the cost goes to the constraint for the budget, and the low reduction uncertainty that goes to the objective. We try to make sure that we can get the right amount for low reduction aggregated and to provide to the system. So and we prove that actually this so-called upper confidence bound algorithm, which is kind of what we use to solve the multi-arm bandit problem, achieves really good performance in this particular setting, and we can achieve also the log T regret. And compared to the other sort of benchmark, which is called like primary gradient, with so-called like a PDG, RF, this kind of algorithm, that you can see that we actually achieve quite good performance, and certainly achieve sublinear regrets. So in both on the group fairness and also the individual fairness. And here's the sort of selection times. And you can see right under the group fairness metric between the two groups, in the total, right, there's kind of similar, but within each of the groups, certainly there will be some unbalanced selection for sure. But for the individual case, that we pretty much make sure that everyone be sort of selected in a similar manner. So showing that this algorithm can achieve that. So that's all from me.